I'm going to show you a full breakdown on how I mix alternative indie drums from raw drums to in a full mix. Now, indie music already has a wide variety of drum sounds, such as indie folk, soft indie, and indie rock, and so much more. And the one that we're going to be focusing on is alternative indie, in quotations, rock drums. So let's get into the mix. As we're looking into this mix, we are looking into my drum patch that I created for y'all, and it's the alternative indie drum patch. What's in this drum patch is all the EQ moves and the plugins that I use in order to get this exact drum sound. And I have it for third-party plugins and stock plugins, so everyone's able to get a vibe out of their drums. So let's look into this mix. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm mixing drums is that I like to set levels with all the kick drum, snare, toms, overheads to make sure everything is glued together. And then after that, then I start EQing. So we'll start with the kick drum. The first thing that I like to do is that I like to use a gate, and my gate of preference I like to use is silencer. And with the silencer, I am using their kick type preset, and I think I added a little more D-bleed to it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. It's killing all that bleed. And so the next thing I like to do is EQ. So for the EQ, I'm taking out 60 Hertz just to take out some of that rumble to leave room for the bass. And then I'm adding 8K with the bell curve, adding quite a bit. And then I am adding 6K on the high mids just to add some extra punch out of the kick. And then the next thing I'm doing is that I am taking out around 400 to 500 Hertz, taking out some of that wolfiness that I don't like to where it sounds muffled. Then I'm also adding 120 Hertz with the bell curve just to add some more low end to the kick. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. You see that we're already getting some punch out of that kick and some extra low end. And then the next thing that I like to do is adding another EQ just to add some enhancements or taking away. And so I am adding around 80 Hertz just to add some low end. And then I'm taking out around 180 to 200 Hertz just to take out some more of that wolfiness out of the kick that was just not sounding good at all. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just cleans it up a ton. And then what I like to do is add compression. So with the compression, I like to use the Distressor plugin, and I'm just using their indie rock preset on here. And this is by Universal Audio, love them. And I think I added some more input, I'm not sure, but I think I left everything else the same on this preset. And this is with it off, and then this is with it on. And I want you to listen to the sustain to the kick. Gonna sustain that low end, and it's gonna add a little extra bite to the kick. So this is with it on. And then, because I am not using a kick out microphone, what I'm doing to substitute that is I am adding the low control by Black Salt Audio. To me, low control feels like a multi-band compressor specifically for the low end, and also a saturation plugin as well for the low end. And so all I'm just adding is just the sub rumble preset on there. And I don't think I changed anything on the control or the low gain on how much dB I'm adding, but I changed the enhance just to bring it down a little bit. It was at like 50%, but then I brought it down to 6% on 50 Hertz. And this is what it's adding. So let me solo that. That's the sub frequency that it's adding. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. It's just adding that extra rumble to the kick. After that, then I like to take my kick drum and then bring it into a bus and label that kick, and then start adding some sauce onto the kick right there. All I'm doing for the bus is just adding Black Salt Audio's escalator just to add some extra saturation and punch to that kick. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just sounds real beefy. I love it. So let's move on to the snare. So as we're looking at the snare, let's look at the snare top. For the snare top, I like to add a gate, and I'm just using their standard snare top preset on there. I changed the D bleed just to 10%, and yeah, it just cleans it up a ton. So this is what it sounds like off, and this is what it sounds like on. Just cleans it up a ton to where I'm able to push frequencies that I normally wouldn't. So the next thing I like to do is an EQ. And for my EQ, I'm using the SSL channel by Waves. And so I'm taking out around 60 Hertz just to take out some of that rumble, control the low end. And then I'm adding 8K with a bell curve, adding a ton just because I'm able to with that silencer on there, to where I'm not having that much cymbal bleed. And then I am adding, I'm adding 5K, just a little bit, just to add some extra punch in the high mids. And then I'm taking out around 600 to 700 Hertz, taking out some of that wolfiness that we don't want to hear in the snare. And then I'm adding around 200 Hertz with the bell curve, just adding some extra low end and punch to that snare. So this is with it off, and this is with it on. Notice the amount of punch that we get out of the snare. Sounds so good. And then the next thing that I like to do is clean up EQ, and it's just the stock Logic EQ. And I'm just adding an extra 150 Hertz just to add some extra low end and punch, and then taking out some 260, just taking out some of that wolfiness out of there, almost kind of like the kick drum. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Listen to how much it cleans it up. And then the next thing I'm doing is a compressor. My compressor I like is the Distressor. And I'm just using their indie rock snare preset. Didn't change anything, it just sounds super good. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. It's adding some extra sustain to the snare as well, just to keep that ring as well. That's it for the snare top, so let's look at the snare bottom. Now for the snare bottom, I am putting a gate on there just to take out some of that kick drum and to where we can focus on that buzz. And I'm just using their snare bottom preset. I think I changed the D bleed to -38 just to add some extra buzz, bring in a little bit of that bleed in there. And so this is with it off. As you can tell, you can hear a lot of the kick drum. And so this is with it on, and you'll hear to where it saves the bottom snare. So the next thing that I like to do is EQ, and I'm taking out around 100 Hertz just to take out some more of that kick drum low end. Either though we're taking it out with the silencer, I still like to throw that in there. And then I'm adding a ton of 8K, no bell curve this time. And then on the high mids, I am adding 5K, just adding extra air to the snare wires. Then I'm taking out around 500 Hertz just so I can take out some of that wolfiness out of the snare buzz. And then I'm doing nothing for the lows, and so this is with it off, and this is with it on. Now, I want you to notice that this is going to be quite tense, but just work with me here. So the next thing that I'm doing is compression, and the compressor that I'm using is the one on the SSL channel up here. And so what I'm doing is that I'm using their fast attack to where it's like super fast, doing the threshold at -20, and then the ratio, I believe it's at 7. And I want you to listen to how dynamic this does. It stops the initial attack of the snare and just keeps the extra buzz from the snare wire. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Listen to that initial attack. I love it. And then the next thing that I'm doing is adding their escalator plug-in from Black Salt Audio, just to add some extra oomph to the bottom snares. With it off, with it on. It's adding a little extra air as well. And so what I like to do next is that I like to get a good level between the snare top and snare bottom, level them out to where it sounds like a full snare. And so this is what it sounds like. Also, with the bottom of the snare, make sure you flip your phase as well. So this is with both of them on. And then I'll take both of the snare top and snare bottom, and then I'll group that into a bus, and then we'll add some sauce to the bus. With the main bus, I'm adding another escalator, just adding some extra punch and air to the snare. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. And then I like to do two different reverbs. One just to add some extra width to the snare, and then one just to add an extra sustain to the snare. So let's look at the sustain one first. So I'm using Valhalla's Vintage Verb, and I'm using their gated snare preset. Didn't change anything else, but this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Listen to the sustain. Just adds a little extra sustain to the snare and makes it kind of fatter a little bit too. And then one for width, it's Valhalla Vintage Verb as well, and I'm using their SRAN drum width preset, and this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Almost sounds like an extra like wooden drum room almost, but just add some extra air and sauce to the snare. So let's move on to the toms. For the toms, you're wanting them to sound pretty big and open. And so the first thing I like to do for the plugins is I add a gate to the tom. I'm using their standard tom setting, and this is with it on. Next thing I like to do is an SSL channel EQ, and I'm taking out 60 hertz, taking out some of that rumble, and then I'm adding a ton of 8K with the bell curve just to add some attack and snap to that tom. Same thing doing with 6K, adding some extra snap and top end, and then I'm taking away some of that wolfiness that I don't like, and that's usually around 300 to 400 to 500 hertz, and so I'm just dipping that out just a little bit. And then for the low frequency, I am adding 120 hertz just to add some extra low into it with the bell curve as well. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Notice the low end and attack. It cleans it up so much. And then the next thing I'm doing is another cleanup EQ, adding some extra low end around 75, or not 75, 120 hertz, sorry. Adding some more low end, which I could add on that other plugin, but I just wanted to do it on here. And then taking away around 300 to 400 hertz, taking out some of that wolfiness. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. And then I like to add a compressor, and for the compression, I am trying to sustain that low end, so get a little instead of a just a quick sound. No, I don't want that. I want sustain out of it. And so I'm using their bass drum more sustain. This is usually used for kick, but I'm using it for toms. So I'm blasting that input in there just to add some sustain to the floor tom, or for the high tom, sorry. And this is with it off. And now this is with it on. Listen to the sustain and attack. And now let's move on to the floor tom. Now for the floor tom, I like to do the same thing with the top tom, trim off where I'm not going to be on the WAV file, where I'm not going to be hitting it at all. And then I like to throw on a gate. So the gate I'm using is the silencer, using the tom standard preset as well. And for this one right here, I'm doing a lot of those hits, and I added the ghost notes to it, just doing automation with it, just so it brings in those extra notes that I'm hitting the floor tom with. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just cleaning it up a little bit. And then the next thing I'm doing is a EQ, SSL EQ, and then I'm taking out 60 hertz again, taking out that wolfiness, adding 8K, not using a bell curve because already that floor toms has enough attack to it. Adding 6K, just a little bit, like I said, not too much attack. And then taking out around 700 hertz, just a little bit, just taking out some of that wolfiness again. And then adding, adding 120 hertz just to add some extra low end, but not too much, but yet adding a bell curve to it. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Nice, love it. And then doing another cleanup EQ, and all I'm doing right here is just taking out around 300 hertz, just taking out more of that wolfiness. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Love it, taking out that wolfiness, man. And then I am adding sustain to it with this compressor, and I am using the distressor compressor, using that same bass drum, more sustain preset, same settings and everything. So this is with it off. You probably won't hear it on this setting or on this part right here of the sustain, but this is with it on. Kind of adding a little extra attack to it as well. And then for the floor tom, how I want to control those low end to where you can hear it start flubbing a little bit. I'm using low control, and I'm using their smooth low preset. I did bring down some of the dB to where it's controlling 110 hertz, doing nothing with the enhancer, but it is on. This is with it on what it's controlling right here. You'll be able to hear it if you're using headphones, but that's the low end that's controlling, and so this is with it on. You notice how that low end is not getting all flubby and just going everywhere. And so what I like to do next for the top tom and floor tom is that I'll take both of those and then bring them into a tom bus and then add whatever I want onto that tom bus. But for this setting and scenario, I didn't add anything. So let's move on to the overheads. Now for the overheads, what you want to do is that you want to make sure that both of your overheads are lined up with your snare with a measuring tape, or you can use a 1/4 inch or string or whatever, but make sure that they're aligned to where it's in phase, because I've had sometimes to where my overheads are out of phase with my drums, and let me just tell you, it ruins the mix. So make sure that your overheads are in phase. And then after when you get that, and so what I like to do for my overheads, I'll take the left and right channel and then group them into a bus, and I like to mixing everything right there as the stereo pair. But for each individual overhead, I like to add just a little EQ just to clean it up a little bit. So let's look at that. So for the EQ on both of them, it's the exact same thing. Taking out 100 hertz, 108 to be exact, and then bringing down 151 hertz. All I'm doing right there for that 151 is that I'm trying to control that kick and snare to where they're living in that little spot right there, and so I'm wanting to control it a little bit. And that's for the left and right channel. And so let's look at the bus. So for the bus, all I'm doing is that I'm doing some EQ and compression. So for the EQ, I'm using the SSL EQ, taking out 120 hertz, adding 10K just to add some brightness to the microphones and to the cymbals. Another note is that the microphones that I'm using are ribbon microphones, so they're already gonna be warm, and so I'm just brightening it up a ton. You may not be using that much high end for your microphones, so that's another note. For the high mids, I'm adding 5K just to bring some extra brightness to the overheads. And then I am taking out around 200 to 300 hertz. That's where that toms, the kick drum, the snare, and all that, to where they were pushing a little too much in that frequency, to where I just backed it off just a little bit. As you can tell, I have the phase flipped on here because I didn't check phase or anything. But this is with it off. And then this is with it on. And so the next thing I like to do is a compressor. Now with overheads, I am not trying to over compress that much, because when you start over compressing your overheads, you'll start getting some swirliness and artifacts that you're not wanting to go for, especially in this genre. But what I'm really wanting is sustain out of my cymbal hits. And so I'm using the distressor, and I'm using their drum overheads preset, to where it's just adding a little hint of sustain to my cymbals and just controlling those initial hits to where everything is kind of leveled out. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. you can tell that those initial hits with the cymbals, that it's kind of tailing off a little bit. So let's move on to the hi-hat. So for the hi-hat, what I'm trying to go for is that just a good round sounding hi-hat. I don't want it to where it's like overdone with the high pass filter to where it sounds like a no, we don't want that. We want good rounding sound hi-hats. And so what I'm doing for that is that I'm taking out around 300 hertz because I don't want anything else in that frequency to be showing up. And then I'm adding around 5K, just a little bit, just bring up some of the brightness of the hi-hat. And then I am also adding 1.5K just to add some extra body to the hi-hat. And then I'm taking out around 800 hertz, just a little bit, just taking out some of the initial stick hit to where I don't want that. And then for the low mids, I'm taking out around 800 hertz, just trying to control the initial stick hits. And then doing nothing for the lows. And so this is with it off. And then this is with it on. It may sound bad by itself, but in the context of a mix, it just works. And so the next thing that I like to do is compression. And for the compressor, I'm using the distressor compressor, and I'm just using the drum overheads preset again. I don't want too much compression on my hi-hats or my cymbals just because it'll add swirliness, and I don't want that. And so this one's just kissing it a little bit. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. It's kind of leveling off those initial hits to where it's kind of even instead of just going everywhere. Now let's look on to the room mic. Now when it comes to this kind of genre, a room mic is very crucial for this sound to get like a big rounded sound, and also just glues in the drum sound. And so what I like to do is just two things, just EQ and compression. The microphone I'm using is just it's a blue baby bottle microphone. It's only around 300 bucks, and I have it to where it's like around 15 feet away from the drum kit, and it's also like 5 foot up above the ground. And so this is what it sounds like just raw. Sounds so good, love it. And so all I'm doing is just I'm choosing a preset on here. I'm using the CLA room for the SSL channel, and I think it's also adding some compression to it as well. This is what it sounds like on. Just making that room sound real mean and open. And then the next thing I like to do is another compressor, and I'm using the distressor, but using their preset, the drum room preset. This is what it sounds like on. It's just kind of squashing the room, just because you can sometimes have the room to where it sounds more natural, but for this genre, I'm wanting it to sound like it's just squished together and just add some extra grit to the actual drum kit. That's what I like to do for the room. Now let's move on to the crotch microphone. Now for the crotch microphone, I'm not doing too much, just mainly like punch and saturation that I'm just adding. So the first thing that I like to do with the crotch microphone is just adding EQ. I'm just doing the CLA mono room preset. This is all the curves. It says that it's not adding 5K, but yet it has the bell curve. Not sure why. It is having a gate or something like that, but I think I just took that out. It is adding around 4.5K, just adding some extra punch because it's right there next to the kick and snare, and so you're going to get a lot of attack out of the crotch microphone. And then it says that it has 2.5K. It may be adding a little bit of that, and then also adding 60 hertz. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. And then I just added a EQ, just taking out around 100 hertz, just trying to control that low rumble from the kick drum. And then I am adding a compressor to it just to add some more saturation to the crotch microphone. And I'm using their Only Dirt preset. And so this is kind of squashing the microphone. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Ah, I love it. And then I like to take all the buses and wave files and then create them into one drum bus. And then I like to add some sauce to that drum bus. So let's check it out. So for the drum bus, I like to add a parallel compressor, also add a little bit of width, and then a clipper as well. So let's go first to the compressor. So the compressor that I'm using on the main bus is the BSA drum bus by Blacksaw Audio. Love this drum bus compressor. It is so good, I highly recommend it. I'm just using their Jordan's preset of the drum bus starter. Didn't change anything. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Sounds so good. It's tightening everything up together. And then the next thing I'm doing is just the Blacksaw Audio clipper, just to control those certain transients to where they're not peaking. And then the next thing that I like to do is parallel compression. Woo, here we go. So for the parallel compressor, I'm using the drum bus compressor. I'm using Jordan's parallel crush preset. Didn't change anything about it, just because it sounds so good. So this is with it off. And then this is with it on. Just listen to how good this sounds. Sounds so good. If you want to see how I go in depth on getting a fat snare sound from the miking and tuning, check out this video.